Hey everyone, in this video I wanted to explore Azure Functions for the IT professional, for the non-developer. Often we might think of as IT admins, hey, Azure Functions, that's that advanced serverless platform as a service offering. That's not for me. When the reality is it's super useful for many IT admin, sysadmin tasks. As always, this is useful. A like and subscribe is appreciated. So Azure Functions are one of the serverless offerings available in Azure. Just also there are many other types of serverless offering available. But what we think about here is we only pay for the work we are actually doing. I'm triggering something, it does something, and I pay for the work it does. Now, other services, think of an app service and an app service plan or Azure Kubernetes services. Yes, they're PaaS, and yes, they might auto scale. So they might add and remove instances from their pools based on the work done. But I'm paying for the underlying compute units, really virtual machines underneath. I'm not paying exactly for the work that's happening. Yes, auto scale based on some metric helps optimize the number of instances and therefore my bill, but really I'm still paying for, under the hood, virtual machine units. Whereas in the serverless offerings, I'm literally paying for the work it actually does. So let's think about exactly how this works then. I mean, obviously there are still servers. Behind serverless, there are servers. But they're basically completely invisible to us. It's not something that we focus on. But because it is serverless, we think of it as event-driven. So I'm going to have this idea of, sure, I'm going to have my function that I pay for when it's doing some work, but that function has to be event-driven. Something is going to happen to then make that function fire, do its work, and then it will disappear. Now that event could be something as simple as a schedule. Hey, at this certain time, every 5 minutes, whatever that might be. It could be manual. It could be there's some kind of API call to it. It might be called from something like Event Grid. So Event Grid is super powerful that it can hook into many other types of source events. I write a blob to a storage account. An item gets written to a queue. Huge numbers of different things. And then it can call some serverless offering. For example, an Azure Function. So something is going to trigger that calls the function. The function is going to do its work, and then it disappears. So these are really focused on being very, very short-lived. Now, there are concepts like durable functions where it's longer-lived. That might be different patterns where maybe it fans out to multiple functions, then fans back in. Maybe it's a chain of functions. Maybe there's a function watching another function. Maybe there's asynchronous API calling. Maybe I do need some manual human interaction. But I'm really going to focus on just wanting to do some simple piece of work. So as an administrator, hey, maybe I want to start some VMs or stop some VMs or perform some tasks against VMs or storage accounts or whatever it might be. It might be calling other things outside of Azure. But maybe it's a PowerShell script. Maybe it's Python. Maybe it's something else entirely. And I just want somewhere that can run this thing. Now, in the past, we might have used Azure Automation. But what we're going to see is, well, these functions are really powerful and give me a great way to actually call some piece of code that I might have. But again, there's some event that's going to trigger this thing to happen. So what I want to do is walk through a super simple example of actually creating a function. And I'm just going to start some VMs, really basic. There are other ways to start VMs. There's native tasks in Azure, for example. But it's a nice, easy thing we can see happening in the environment. So step one, and we're going to start right from the beginning, we'll go ahead and create a new environment actually for our function. Now, one of the things is there are different plans. So I have to create a function app. Now I'm just going to go ahead and create a new resource group. We'll call it RG function. I give it a function app name. So this has to be some unique name that I have. I'm just going to call it sav VM manage. And notice I could use a Docker container. If there was some set of runtime version that is not just natively supported, I could use a Docker container image that's also got this function addition in it, and I could use that as the base for where my code is going to run. But for me, well, notice I've got all these different options, but I'm going to go ahead and use PowerShell core. I'm going to use the latest 7.2. I pick a region. I'm just going to leave it as Central US. Because it's PowerShell core, it's picking Windows as the base OS for the runtime stack. And then I have my plan. Now the default is this consumption based, i.e. I pay for the work it's doing. But there's also functions premium where maybe there's additional capabilities, there's idea of network integrations. If I already have an app service plan, well, I could run it in there. But I'm just going to take that consumption based. And one of the nice things when I think about this consumption based is if we quickly go and look at the pricing for a second, we get a certain amount free. So if you look at this free grant per month, I get 1 million executions. Beyond that, it's 20 cents per million executions. Now there is a storage account. I do have to pay for the data written to the storage account. Typically this will not be a lot of money there. But you can see we get a huge amount of this just for free. So if there's a certain amount I need to do just basic tasks, this is really nice. It's not going to cost me any money. Then there's this idea of the premium plan that has additional capabilities on top of that. But if I'm just running some basic scripts, I don't need that. So I'm going to run it serverless. So it's going to create that new storage account for me. I'm not going to have networking options because I'm not running the premium or any other SKUs. I'm just using the consumption. I'm not going to turn on the app insights capabilities. I'm going to keep me super cheap. And basically at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and create it. So this is creating the function app. And then within the function app, I can actually then go and create functions that I want to actually call. So I can think about, as that's kind of finishing off, hey, I'm going to create my functions. But what's going to happen is I create those under a certain function app that has that plan. And that function app itself has certain properties. I can have multiple functions within there, but there are certain application settings. It has the concept of an identity. It has certain files that are details about the environment I'm actually going to be using. But the first thing I want to do is, well, I can turn on the idea of a managed identity. Remember, a managed identity is super powerful that now this function app as an Azure resource has its own identity in Azure Active Directory. And why that's so useful is if there are other Azure resources. In my case, it's going to be VMs. They sit in a certain resource group in a certain subscription. But it could be a storage account. It could be a database. It could be an Azure Key Vault with secrets in it. And the whole point now is at the resource level, at the resource group it's in, at the subscription, anything I want, these all have different types of role-based access control. And so the managed identity for my function app, I can give roles. So hey, this managed identity, I can give various roles. So now the code that I run in my function within the function app, as the identity, has those rights. Hey, it can read particular secrets that maybe then it uses to access other things. Hey, I've got blob data plane access so I can read files. Hey, I can start and stop VMs. So I've given this RBAC, maybe at a resource group level, maybe at a subscription level. I don't have to store this identity in any kind of code. There's no password, there's no certificate. As this function in this function app, I can just use that managed identity. So the first thing we want to do is set that up because this is so powerful. So if we go back we can see, hey, our deployment is complete. Fantastic. Let's go and look at our function app. So what I want to do, the first thing, we're going to come over here. And I think it's still there we go. And I'm going to come down to settings and I want to look at this identity. And I'm just going to turn this on. So I'm going to turn on to get a system assigned managed identity. That means its life cycle of that identity is tied to this particular function app. There are also user assigned, and I have other videos about that. But user assigned would let me give a certain identity to multiple Azure resources that could use the same sets of permissions. So I've now created that managed identity. And what I'm going to do is I want to start some VMs. Now, a role that lets me do that would be VM contributor. So I'm going to quickly jump over. Now, I could have done it within that screen, but I want to show you there's nothing special about it. If I go to access control, I'm going to do it at the subscription level. I'm going to add a new role assignment. I'm going to pick my, actually, that's not VM. Let's set for virtual machine. I want my virtual machine contributor. And I'm going to give it to managed identity. And the member is a function app. And there's the one that I just turned on. So it's the same name as the function app. Select, review and assign. And it's now adding that role assignment. So now if I look at my role assignments, all the way down the bottom, I can see, hey, virtual machine contributor has been given to the managed identity of my function app. And again, that could be any role. I could set it at a resource group, at a resource. It could be data plane access. But now that function code can act as that identity without having to worry about secret certificates or anything else. Now I want to use that. The good news is I don't have to do anything. If I look at my function app and look at app files, there's two things that I want to pay attention to here. So these are for all of the functions that run under this function app. Firstly, if I look at the host.json, managed dependency is enabled. It's set to true. And where this comes in is I can add requirements for the modules I want to be available, and it will go and download these. Now I do want to use the AZ modules because I want to start some Azure VMs. So I'm going to uncomment that line. It's going to give me the latest version of the 8, which is currently the latest one. And I'm going to hit save. So now the AZ modules will be available to my PowerShell code. Again, I'm doing PowerShell, so it has these specific files. Other runtimes you use, you'll get different files available to you here. Okay, the other thing is, well, I want to use that managed identity. Well, if I look at my profile file for PowerShell, I actually don't have to do anything. If it has this managed identity available to me, it's actually just going to go and connect as it. I don't have to do anything to use it. If it detects I have a managed identity, it's just going to automatically authenticate to Azure, get the token that I can then use to connect to things. So I don't actually have to do anything. All I have to do is enable the managed identity down here, but then my code itself is just going to be able to use it without doing anything else. So now let's actually think about creating a function. So now I hit create. Notice I could develop it in VS Code. I could develop it anywhere else and then push it to a Git repo and then use pipelines to push it. But I'm just going to develop it in the portal. It has various templates. Remember, it's event driven. I have to have some trigger. And it has a bunch of templates that I can really base this on. But I'm just going to do it on a timer. So it's going to run at a certain schedule. Then if I scroll down, but notice there's many other types I could use here. I could give it a name. So I'm going to say every day 6 a.m. start. And then I have that end cron tab expression. So I think this is every 5 minutes is what it has. I'm going to change this to, I think that's 6 a.m. Doesn't really matter, but end cron tabs basically added the idea of seconds, I believe, is what it changes. So it's second, minute, hour, day, month, day of week. So hey, I'm going to say create. So it's going to go and create this new function for me. And it will lay out some sample code. And if I go to my code and test, it's created a number of files specific to this function. Now, firstly, I can see the function JSON, which is that timer trigger. So here I can see, hey, I have the schedule, so I could modify this if I wanted to. But then I have my code itself. And at this point, I'm just going to tweak this content. So it's, hey, PowerShell timer is running late, so I might change that to, okay, my PowerShell VM start, because it's detecting, hey, my timer is past due. PowerShell timer VM start function ran. This is really just some debugging information. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to create an array of 2 VM names and start them. So I'm just going to paste that in so I don't have to type it. So it's something called demo VM and demo VM SRV. And then for each of them, it's just going to do a search for it so I don't have to know the resource group name and start it asynchronously. It's not going to wait. It's just going to fire off those virtual machines. And I hit save. Now, while it's doing that, let's jump over for a second. And we can go and look at our virtual machines. And notice those virtual machines are the bottom 2, and they're currently both stopped. Easy enough. Now, at this point, I could just wait. But instead, I'm going to do a test run. So I'm going to do test run. I could make this have various parameters. I could pass things in. I don't need any. This is super, super simple. I can just hit run. Now, the first time it runs, realize it has to go and pull those dependencies. So that AZ modules that I said was going to have to go and download those. So the first run, and I've kind of seen some strange behavior sometimes. So that first execution may not behave exactly how I want it to. Sometimes when I'm doing the testing, I might trigger that again. But at this point, this should go off. It should go and pull those dependencies and then execute my piece of code. So for some reason, I've never seen this before, but of course I'm demoing, so it's going to do something very unusual. There you go. So it accepted it. And what we can see, I can actually close that down, is, hey, the first managed dependency download is in progress. Function execution is going to take a little while. Subsequent ones won't block. So this is going to take a while because it has to go and pull down those requirements. In this case, all of the modules that are part of AZ. So AZ is that parent. There's a lot of stuff in there that's going to have to complete before this will actually run. So we'll obviously edit this wait out. Okay, so now we can see it is actually doing those starts of the VMs, starting demo VM and starting demo VM SRV, accepted. So if we jump over and refresh, one's running, one started. So we can see that that actually worked. I did kind of, in the editing, there was a weird error. Sometimes you just have to restart them. Again, in this testing, and it's still downloading things, slightly weird things can happen. One of the things that's important to point out is make sure there's no user interaction required in this script. Obviously, if it's asking for press enter or confirm, it's not going to work. So really make sure you have that. I guess I'll show one other little thing. Obviously, that's using that managed identity because it had rights to start the VM. There are environment variables. If I close this for a second, we do have the idea over here of application settings. And they're very easy to use in our code. So I could create a new application setting. I'll just call it VM list. And for the values, I'm just going to type in those 2 servers. So it's just separated by comma, demo VM, comma, demo VM SRV. Okay. So now I have this VM list as an environment variable. And so now in my code, now again, that's not particularly great. Oh, make sure you save. Nearly messed that up. Make sure you save when you add those. It's changing the files behind the scenes that contain those. Now what I'll do is quickly, while that's saving, I'm going to stop these two VMs. So we can start them again. And now we'll just use that environment variable. Again, is this a good use of this? Not particularly. It might make more sense that I had a comma separated file, maybe in a blob storage account. So I would use the managed identity to give me data reader to the data plane to read the file to process them. I just want to show using an environment variable. So I'll go back to my function. Remember, I've got two values separated by a comma. So I'm going to change my code just slightly. So instead of having that array defined in my code now, that $VM names, well, now my $VM names, I need to go and get the environment variable. So it's super simple. It's just env $, the name of that environment variable, VM list. Now remember, it's just a string separated by commas. So I just need to do a quick split on the comma character. So then it would make an array of the two values. I don't have to change anything else. So I'll hit save. I'm getting this weird connection thing occasionally. This will kind of sort itself out. I don't honestly quite know why I'm seeing that randomly, but I am. So I've saved this. And if we try and do the test run again, it's going to make it hard to see, I guess, the output. But what we should still see, so these have stopped. Here's if I hit run. So the response was accepted. And if this comes back, great. If it doesn't, I should still see it working. I should still actually see those VMs stopping. Sorry, starting, not stopping. So if we refresh over here, so it's still stopped right now. See if I can. Come on. It would be absolutely nice to see it. So now it's connected. So now we're connected to log streaming service. Again, I don't know why that wasn't working. It seems to be having a few hiccups. Let me just try and trigger that one more time, that test run. It might be messing up because of that connectivity. Okay, it's actually complaining about my code. The module containing env $ is not working. Oh, I did it wrong. It's not env $. My bad. It's $env. Half asleep today. All right, so $env : VM list split. That's the correct format, not env $. So we'll hit save again, and we'll do a test run again. That's why it wasn't working. Hit run. But luckily that logs kind of showed me, hey, John, you're being stupid. Scroll down. Okay, so now it's executing it again. Hopefully this time I've done it correctly. And we can see, hey, starting demo VM. So this time it did read it. And notice it is using the managed service, managed system identity. And it's starting the VMs. It said it succeeded. And Paul takes a little second to catch up, but I'm pretty confident this should change. Starting demo VM SRV, there was no errors. There we go, unknown. So the fact that it's gone unknown means they're both starting. So now they're both starting and we're good. So that was a simple change. So this time we use an environment variable. And if I went and looked at the overview page, you'd actually go and see, hey, I can see the memory working set. I can see the function executions it was doing, megabytes of memory. So I can go and get information about it. But as you saw then, so a few little hiccups because I'm doing it very quickly. I'm trying to show the test, but those things and actions. But that wouldn't necessarily cost me any money other than that little storage account it's using. So what we saw here was we created the function app. So the function app can contain one or more functions. The function app has the idea of a managed identity. Remember, the function app also had, for example, the requirements file where I could go and add in a PowerShell world the additional modules. Then the function itself, it defined what was its trigger. And then I have obviously its code. And then when that trigger happens, I could manually do it in my test and I can go and see that debugging information. But in my case, that schedule, this is just going to run and start those virtual machines. Yes, there's things like environment variables. Never put secrets in environment variables. If I have a secret, I put it in the key vault. I use the managed identity and give it permission to the secret, read it from the key vault, and then use it to connect to whatever I need to do. Never put secrets or anything valuable in the code, or really even environment variables if you can help it. Put it in the key vault, use the managed identity to get to the key vault. So that was it. I really just wanted to show really the simplicity of this. I could pass values into the function. VS Code is a great way. There's an extension for functions, so I can edit in VS Code and quickly just push it into my function. But for an IT admin, hey, if I have some PowerShell or Python or other things I just need to somewhere to run, maybe via a trigger, maybe via a schedule, maybe when something happens, functions are really, really powerful and very cost-effective way to actually do that. So I hope, as always, this was useful. Until the next video, take care.